All right. What do we think of the exam? Was that pretty manageable? Sizes on the exam. I haven't had a chance to look at them. This is when everything gets busy before we get a little bit of a break. All right. Well, I guess I can tell my audience of one that this will be our last time meeting in person for lecture. Lab will happen tomorrow. I have changed the topic for today. I just flipped this with one that was scheduled to happen next week. When I planned my syllabus, I guess I hadn't quite planned out the fact that we wouldn't be in person for all of our labs. So I moved up a topic that is a little more enjoyable for lab tomorrow. If you do show up in person, it's related to this lecture topic. So that was the goal there. So this will be our last in-person lab tomorrow. Then the week of Thanksgiving, we don't have a lab. And then 2 weeks after that, for the next 2 weeks after that, we will have whatever happened with the water ferns. The next 2 weeks, last 2 weeks of the semester, we'll have virtual labs. So I'll basically have a recorded experience for you and some interactive stuff you can do as a part of that. The water ferns, I have photos of those. I think they might be, we had about half of them die, the ones that got the nutrient addition. Those of you who were in person experienced that. The rest of them might not make it long term, but we should have something. I think we can analyze the data on that, and that'll be my plan for one of the future. We can, maybe the one after Thanksgiving, use that to evaluate our data and maybe run even a statistical analysis on there. So they exist. I guess I should also mention, so for tomorrow's lab, I was planning to give people the plants that they have propagated. So if you show up, you can take plants home. If you want to have a plant and you're not able to come get it, you can let me know and I'll hold something on for you. Hold on to something for you. I thought that was sort of a thing I can do for you in this class. It'd be a shame if you went through a plant class and didn't get out of here with any plants to show for it. I may not have done the best on keeping those water ferns alive, but I have done a much better job than usual of keeping the propagated plants alive. So those are, I think they're all okay, the ones that people set up. All right, so any other questions before we, I guess, wrap up our in-person portion of the semester? So if you're tuning in online on WebEx, you probably won't see anything different, except I might sound different and I'll be in front of my computer only, so you'll see my face more than you see it normally. But other than that, it'll be same old stuff. So there'll be live WebEx, there'll be a recording of the WebEx, there'll be topic preps as usual. I had a question about the final exam. The final exam, shoot, I forget. I think it's let's say the Thursday of exam week. Let me check. I had it up not too long ago. So if you have the printed version of the syllabus, I had the date wrong on there. The exam schedule is available on the, I think they call it Schedule of Classes link from the registrar website. They don't come up automatically in WINS. I don't know why that is. Yeah, so we're scheduled here for 10 a.m. on Thursday. I got an interesting, they send an email to faculty every semester reminding us that we need to have in-person exams. Of course, they have sent people away. They don't want you to be here after Thanksgiving, so there will not be an in-person exam, and it doesn't seem reasonable for me to require you to take it at 10 a.m. on Thursday. So I'll do the exam, the final exam, the same way I've done the other exams where you'll have a 2-hour period during that day to take it. And it doesn't matter much to me that you take it on that day. So if you have a reason not to take it on Thursday, just let me know. It's all going to be online. It's going to be very much like previous exams. I'll try to get the practice questions out to you like I did for this past one. So not as many surprises as you might have in a typical semester. We will be, so I guess today's content starts the material for the final exam. My exams they're not particularly cumulative. I don't want you to forget things that we've learned up to this point, but I don't like to dig in for things that you might have forgotten. There's going to be some forgetting as you go, but I'm hoping at the end of this whole experience that you've internalized some ideas about plants that you can carry with you moving forward. Sorry, Linda, you're my only in-person person, so I have to interact with you. I can't see anybody else. All right, so I didn't get the PowerPoint up to Canvas before this. I have it done, and I will post it to Canvas after this. I get kind of excited about this topic, and so I was maybe getting a little carried away. There's a lot more slides than I think we'll have time to cover, and maybe we'll continue on them moving forward. This topic, we could cover this over several class periods probably. It's basically the topic of metabolism that plants do that's sometimes different by species, and it's called secondary or sometimes specialized secondary metabolism, secondary compounds, or specialized metabolism, specialized compounds. And they're basically off to the side of what a plant really essentially needs. So I think a nice contrast for specialized compounds or secondary compounds will be to think about what a plant would need if somebody was taking care of it. So here's an example of some plants growing in a research facility. They are sealed off from the world. They've possibly been sterilized, so they have no bacteria associating with them. No viruses are going to come into contact. No bad fungi, possibly no fungi at all. So kind of up to this point, we've talked about really the basics of what a plant does. If we think about photosynthesis and obtaining water, things like that are really essential to being a plant. But on top of that, there's this secondary metabolism that plants use to accomplish a bunch of other things in their environment. So just, I guess, to get started, when we talk about primary metabolism, today's topic is a lot of molecules. So we're pretty deep in the topic you might consider as physiology at this point. And basic metabolism involves some familiar molecules. And the arrows on here show that there are enzymes that can convert these molecule types into each other. So on the left side, we have the carbohydrate zone. So glucose, our kind of standard simple sugar, can be easily converted into other kinds of sugars relatively easily. Long-term carbohydrate storage can be accomplished with starches. So those are really just chains of sugars. And then through a couple conversions, maybe you recognize these molecules from, say, cellular respiration, pyruvate, acetyl coenzyme A. And then off to the other end here, through a couple conversion steps, we can go from our carbohydrates to lipids or fatty acids. So if you remember from introductory biology, we're kind of building up those basic molecule types. So carbohydrates, lipids, and then through a couple branching off points here, nucleic acids, amino acids. Those are really the essential molecules, really the molecule categories of essential molecules for keeping cells and organisms alive. But for most plants, it's not enough just to be alive. It's tough to be a plant. And a couple of years ago, I had a guest lecturer. He's a biochemist, works on plant chemistry, and he gave the guest lecture on this topic. And I really enjoyed his perspective on things. One of the things he pointed out was that plants have chemicals or these other kinds of molecules in a lot of ways to sub in for the fact that they can't get around. So plants are stuck in place. So challenges or opportunities that animals might encounter, they move to take advantage of that. What would they move for that plants can't necessarily move to take advantage of? What do you think? So compare a plant to an animal. What does an animal move to do? Find food, all right. Avoid predation, all right. Good start. Everything. I forgot already. What did you say, Linda? Find food, all right. Check our chat here. Shelter. All right, so predation. We'll say something about temperature. Avoid being too hot, too cold. Anybody else want to type in there? All right, reproduction. Right, so on the diagram here, I also kind of like this diagram. It goes along with the same theme. So we have these plants in a field somewhere. One of them has a hamburger for some reason. But they're in the environment, they're getting big sun, rained on, chewed by worms in the soil, partnering with each other. I don't know what every little bit of this image is meant to indicate. Maybe interact with neighbors, so plants with other plants, communicating. So they're, I'd say, equivalents to most of this in the plants. So finding food, we typically maybe don't think as much about that for plants because they can do photosynthesis and make their own food. But what about nutrients, right? So soil nutrients, could they use a chemical to increase their chance getting soil nutrients? We've seen them partnering with mycorrhizae, soil bacteria. There might be some of these secondary molecules that are involved in communicating with partners in the soil. A big part of what we'll talk about today is avoiding being eaten. Lots of chemical ways that plants can avoid being eaten. Responses to environmental stress, we'll have some of that in there. Reproduction, definitely. So I think we covered most of the stuff we're going to talk about here. Good job. All right, so we talked about basic metabolism. That's down there in yellow. And specialized metabolism. So metabolism is the process of converting molecules into other molecules. Enzymes are involved in that. The specialized version are all these branching off points. So they sort of start from the basic molecules and they build up into categories of molecules that are really only in this secondary metabolism category. And we'll see some of these in detail. So nicotine, caffeine fall into this category of alkaloids. You're probably familiar with THC over here, just for kicks. This was in the, I copied across a diagram that I had seen. And THC is a very complicated molecule. It's kind of in its own molecule class. So good job to you, plant, coming up with that one. Specialized lipids. So we have kind of these branching off points from a lipid starting point, branching off from more of a generic molecule starting point. So we'll talk about some of these categories. In a lot of cases, these are really big categories. So a little molecular difference can make a lot of biological difference. If you're talking about a scent signal or a toxin, there's a lot of variety in those and a lot of variety in the functions they can accomplish. So I realize we're not all chemists and probably not usually thinking about molecules. I'm going to put up a whole bunch of molecule pictures, and I don't expect you to know those at all or really recognize anything about them. I might mention something here or there, but just kind of in general, I want to, I don't know, I think molecule diagrams are cute. And I make it, if you are familiar with anything about them, side chains or anything like that, you might recognize something a little more familiar if I show you the molecule types. One of the things that I think is interesting in chemistry is these molecules they have names, right? You name a molecule because of where you found it. We have some rather familiar molecules. Asparagine is one of our amino acids. And maybe you thought about it, maybe it never occurred to you. The name asparagine comes from asparagus. So when chemists were using their tools to put names on what's all out there, isolating specific molecules, a lot of times the easy way to get these molecules was to get them from plants, and you just isolate a molecule and say, this is where I got it from. A little bit of a stretch, but this plant called gum arabic, you might have seen it on ingredient labels. The name for that is related to arabinose, ribose, one of our foundational sugars, ribose, the backbone sugar for RNA, of course. I mentioned we won't go into detail on these, but just here's an example. This is from basil. And one of the active ingredients in basil is this one in the lower right called linalool. It's impossible to say. Sorry, goes away when I cover it up. So an arrow to linalool, and there are arrows converting. And we started at acetyl coenzyme A, right? So that's one of those branching off points that I mentioned. This is just a little more specific about how you would go from that starting point through, in this case, quite a few intermediates until landing at this linalool molecule. And most of those arrows would be accompanied by an enzyme that does that process. So this isn't just something that kind of happens by accident in plants. They need genes for enzymes that make these changes happen. And in some cases, we'll see some of these molecules across a lot of different plants. So linalool is something that's found in a lot of scents across plants. In other cases, we'll see rather specific molecules that might be produced, as far as we know, by a single plant species. So it must be valuable if they put all that work into making it, right? Must be. Okay, so we talked about functions that plants need to do. And we'll try to break those down individually into categories. We'll talk about them that way. But just some examples on here. So in the upper left, we've got some fruits ripening. So just in that image, there's a lot of secondary compounds to think about. We've got color, we've got scent, we've got flavor. Those are all molecules, and they work on us a certain way. So we are human species, we're vertebrate animals, and we would have certain scent receptors, taste receptors, peculiarities to our color vision. And so if this is a form of communication, or really the plant trying to accomplish a goal of getting these fruits dispersed with the seeds inside, plant has to produce molecules that match up with what the animals are going to do. So we see that, we're attracted to it visually, it tastes good to us, we pick it off the tree, carry it around and drop a seed somewhere, the plant gets what it needs. Other examples, here's some glandular trichomes, so hairs with some defense chemicals inside. Here's an interaction of a pollinator, moth pollinator pollinating at night, and a lot of their location information about where to find their food is driven by scent. So a specific scent combination drawing that animal there to visit the flower. Here an example of sunscreen. We'll see some interesting relationships with plants changing colors to interact with the sun. Here's a stinging nettle with a chemical that is an irritant if it gets under the skin. We've got poison ivy. Poison ivy is an interesting one. People get an allergic reaction to that one. So it produces an oil on its surface that causes people to itch. It's also an irritant to other vertebrate animals, a defense for itself. All right, so let's start in with some visual signals. What kind of molecules do plants make to interact with the light spectra? What have we seen already that involves absorbing light? Chlorophyll? Right. You are correct. All right, so a pigment molecule is a molecule that absorbs visible light. So maybe you've encountered this in your organic chemistry class if you took that. There's a lot of molecules out there that don't have any color to them. So if you get, like you go in your cabinet, you get sugar. Sugar and salt both come out as these white crystals. White is basically no color, and they're not absorbing anything visible there. But other molecules do show us a color, and they have that color because they absorb some colors and they reflect other colors. So we've seen already an example of pigment. Was a molecule of chlorophyll. And chlorophyll, I'd say chlorophyll probably doesn't care what color it is. It serves a function of absorbing some of the light that comes through and making use of that for photosynthesis. And it happens to be green because it's reflecting these middle wavelengths in between the purple or violet end of the spectrum and the red end of the spectrum. And again, this is related to our vision. So we see these colors in what we call the visible spectrum. And so we would see green chlorophyll, of course, as humans see it. But plants can produce other molecules, many of which are related to chlorophyll, absorb different colors. So if you remember, we talked about photosynthesis and we talked about the accessory pigments. So these other molecules that absorb different colors, and those accessory pigments in photosynthesis, they can capture their light color and pass that energy on to chlorophyll. So still related to photosynthesis, what else can you do with a pigment molecule? So here's another way to draw that big old chlorophyll molecule. And so the molecules like chlorophyll that are part of photosynthesis, those are essential or primary molecules. So for a plant, this is one that's really indispensable. Some molecules that are related to chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is in this category of carotenoids. And there are other carotenoids. And a lot of them shown here. Typically, this is molecules we think of in the yellow and orange parts of the spectrum. Heading off into red. Some names here, xanthophyll. So xanthophyll is a kind of carotenoid. And if you're a Greek scholar, xantho is yellow and phyll is leaf. So a xanthophyll is a molecule that gives the yellow color to leaves. Lycopene is related to that comes from the scientific name for tomatoes. Anybody heard of lycopene as a positive food ingredient? So some of these molecules fall into the category of antioxidants. And the oxidant part there is referring to oxidative stress. I don't hear this term much these days. Free radicals is part of this oxidative stress process. And oxidative stress in plants is a byproduct of photosynthesis, basically. My arrow there. So, no free lunch in plants. No free lunch for anybody. So if you're plants and you have your leaves out to the sun, absorbing light, doing photosynthesis, that's great, but that sun exposure also can damage your tissues through this oxidative stress. So plants putting in these antioxidant molecules, a lot of times that goes hand in hand with the photosynthetic pigments or the photosynthetic parts of the plants. People like antioxidants because our cells also experience oxidative stress. And they kind of sell you on these antioxidants that they're going to keep your cells from falling victim to this oxidative stress. So maybe due to sun exposure or dietary factors can also increase your oxidative stress. So I mentioned that to, I guess, come around and talk about the tomatoes. Tomatoes had a high point for a while there. I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago. I think it came out, maybe not came out, the marketing people hit a home run, let's say that. And they said, lycopene, that's an antioxidant. So suddenly tomatoes were health food. And by extension, was a health food. I think that like shot pizza up in the schools could offer that and say, look, we're offering a healthy option. Your kid gets pizza for lunch every day. I mean, they're not terribly far off. Diet is very complex, and you can eat something that's good for you and bad for you at the same time. Okay, so I think most of what we're looking at here, the fruits for certainly, the color is related to having them seen by animals that might disperse them. All the plants in here that are foods, these are also cultivated foods. And previously I suggested with carrots that people have selected for orange carrots over time. So these could be actually richer in color because those have benefited the people who eat them. For example, I don't know, you heard about scurvy, right? Scurvy is a disease you can get if you don't get enough vitamin C in your diet. And any number of these foods would be able to help you out with that. So if you think back to cultures where they didn't have a world of foods at their disposal at the grocery store, people might have to go out of their way to get the nutrients that they need for a complete diet. Xanthophyll, these are ginkgo leaves, not something people would eat. And so this is possibly more highlighting that antioxidant function. We'll talk a little more about when leaves change in the fall. When leaves change, one of the things we see is that the chlorophyll is exiting the leaves and other pigments can show through at that time. So something like xanthophyll would show. Another health food, I guess if you take all the meat out of there, this is the, I don't know, arguably state beverage for Wisconsin, the Bloody Mary. Antioxidants. Next time you need an excuse, tell somebody you've got to get your antioxidants in. Okay, so all of these fall into this carotenoid category, as we will see in lab tomorrow. These are lipid soluble, and they're a much different category of molecule than this other pigment category called the flavonoids. And one of the chief categories of flavonoids that gets a lot of attention is called anthocyanins. These are water soluble. They're a little more in the blue, purple, pink end of the spectrum. So these are a couple molecule names. Pelargonidin. This is a plant called Pelargonium or house geranium. Delphinidin. This is Delphinium or the larkspur. The molecule is basically named for where they were originally found. An interesting thing about some of these anthocyanins is the absorption qualities can change depending on the pH. So these labs where you grind up a red cabbage and expose it to different pH. So the same extract, if you make it more, I'm going to hope this goes, I don't remember, from low pH to high pH. If you give it a more acidic environment, it's more in the pink and red ends of the spectrum. If you add, change the pH so it's more alkaline, you head through these blue colors over to green and yellow. It's the same starting molecule, and you can add, change the pH. You don't add anything that has color to it, but you change the pH, and the molecule ends up taking on a different color. Kind of an interesting fact there. Right, chlorophyll reflects green. Yeah, so depending on the, I'm a little out of my chemical element here. I could look into this. Basically, the pH of the surrounding water affects how that pigment molecule color, and therefore reflect color. Yeah, right. So yeah, so if something doesn't have color, then the light, all the light bounces right back. So if you shine white light on it, it bounces white back. If something is black, then it's absorbing all colors, and it's, I guess, sort of a form of pigment. Not something we see too often in plants, but I'll show you something about that. Yeah, so this, whatever the molecules are, the pH changes their constitution and makes them a different color. Hydrangea is a kind of plant that when you plant a hydrangea, the flowers will come up a different color depending on what your soil pH is. So interesting environmental effects there. And as I mentioned, for antioxidants, plants are also the source of a lot of vitamins. So kind of from a starting point, these are molecules that plants made to benefit themselves, really. But a lot of what plants produce for themselves benefits us. The wheel of vitamins. Not all of these are coming from plants exclusively, so there's some fish and cheese on here. I've just highlighted some of the molecules, and I like this diagram I found. It has lots of plant sources. So if you needed your vitamin C over here, ascorbate, we've got, what is that? Spinach, papaya, peppers, so on. Vitamins for people, vitamins are essential nutrients that we have to get from our diet. So as I mentioned with scurvy, if you ate just what you need for energy, you might end up short on something like that, and you can have health effects if you're short on one of these vitamins, because your body can't make it from scratch. But plants can. I'm going to have a few slides like this. You don't have to know the details, of course, but it's a pretty deep literature of people studying. You say you find a color and you ask, okay, how did we get there? So sort of a basic biological starting point, and then these abbreviations here are the enzymes responsible. So if you had different species with different colors, as with this example, they investigated related species that are producing different colors and say cross them together, one with white petals and pink petals, and they could find out basically how these genes for the synthesis enzymes are shaking out in the offspring. Colors, pelargonidin, cyanidin, delphinidin, different varieties of anthocyanins there. I didn't know where to put this, and I almost didn't mention it, but there's just a small number of plant colors that are actually not produced by a pigment. So if you remember from physics, or maybe you never covered this in physics, you can generate a color through iridescence, which is basically takes advantage of light wavelengths bouncing out of a surface where like some of the wavelengths come out, but not all of them bounce out exactly. It's kind of interesting. This is a plant called Viburnum tinus, and produces these lovely iridescent blue fruits, but it's not actually a blue pigment. It's the result of these layered lipid streaks on the cell wall, I think. All right, skip over that. Okay, so pigments related to, we basically talked about animal attraction. So different animals would respond to different colors. This relates to colors that bees and birds and other animals can see. And so by combination of pigments in the red-orange end of the spectrum, pigments in the blue-pink end of the spectrum, plants have a little bit of control over what color their petals are, and therefore what animals they're recovering as pollinators. Other pigment-related secondary compounds have to do with dealing with the environment. So here we've got, this is a poison sumac in a beautiful red shade at the autumn time of the year. So this time of year, we're a little bit beyond it right now, but a few weeks ago, leaves of plants were changing colors. What kind of plants change their leaf color? Give you a chance to weigh in on that. Now, what kind of plant would make this beautiful red leaf? Okay, plants that lose their leaves. Right, so who's that? We had Renee says deciduous, right? So a deciduous tree so these are trees and shrubs can be deciduous. These are plants that have their leaves fall off in the fall. So it gives our name to the season of fall. And the color change is related really to this strategy. So because they have their leaves falling off, they have this woody part of the body that's going to stay alive. And a big thing that happens in the fall, the trees sense that the days are getting shorter, the days are getting colder, and they pull back the chlorophyll from their leaves. So we talked in nutrients how chlorophyll has contains some nitrogen, contains some magnesium, and these are nutrients that the plant would benefit from recovering. So it basically pulls those nutrients back into the woody part of the plant so that it can recycle them for the next year. And what's left in the leaves could be some of these other colors. Sometimes they are the accessory pigments. In some cases, there are actually pigments that are added as part of this process. And the chlorophyll is an important one. It's got that nitrogen, it's got magnesium. The pigments that stick around in the leaves, a lot of those carotenoids or anthocyanins, they are relatively inexpensive. They might be produced with only carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, those elements that are more easily available from air and water. In a lot of ways, it's just the colors that are less important to cover from a nutrient standpoint. And as you probably heard a few different places, maybe, the colors, a lot of these colors were already there in the leaves. So if you see a tree and it's got green leaves, the green shines through. It's, I don't know, a little more obvious to us. But along with the green, there might be some yellows and other colors in there already. The colors of those accessory pigments, the colors of maybe some antioxidants. And I like this diagram. This is highlighting that molecules in these different categories. So anthocyanins in, as you can see, a little bit more towards, still looks pretty blue, but a little more towards the red end of the spectrum. I'm sure this is a rather generalized image. These carotenoids and xanthophylls and so on, this is all the carotenoid category. They're able to absorb colors in this range. It's possible that these molecules are serving as a bit of sunscreen. So sun can damage our skin, sun can damage the cells of plants. And the wavelengths that are a little more troublesome for us are in this ultraviolet range, right? So wavelengths of light that are coming from the sun that might be causing a little more molecular stress can be absorbed by some of these other molecules. I got a little bit lost in the literature about this. It's really interesting to me, the different, there's a lot of competing hypotheses for why there are colors in leaves, particularly leaves that change color this time of year. One of the interesting factors is that anthocyanins, for a large part, are actually added to the leaves at the end of the year. So they're not always, these colors that show up in the leaves, they're not always ones that were hiding underneath the surface. The reds kind of notoriously fall into this anthocyanin category. and they would be produced during the fall. So they weren't there all summer, but they're coming in the fall. I mentioned that they are water soluble, or maybe I didn't, but I should have. So the antioxidants, these are some schematic drawings of cross sections through leaves. The leaves toward the top, that's the upper surface of the leaf. Those are the cells that are normally doing photosynthesis. And as a water-soluble pigment, the anthocyanins can go into the vacuole of those cells. So somebody just drew the color in there, but that's basically how they would look under a microscope. So why would they be added late in the year? For some plants, the intensity of light is greater in the fall. Your plant that was normally in the understory and the trees above you lose their leaves, you might be encountering more sun. The angle of the sun is different. Combination of sun and temperature could be more stressful than it was before. This one I thought was interesting. This is a company selling you a sunscreen you can spray onto your plants. I didn't see anything about it except that they're selling it, so I don't know how well it works. I suppose you could also just think about plants. We have plants that like full sun, plants that prefer a little bit of shade. Those shade-loving plants, they like shade for a variety of reasons. One of them could be that they are not equipped to handle as much sun stress. So sun's great for photosynthesis, but too much of a good thing might get you in trouble. This image is from a study that I'll talk about more. It's comparing leaves in different parts of the world and the number of them that produce yellows versus the number that produce reds in this autumn time of year. And this one has a really nice photo. You can see there's an imprint of a leaf, right? It's like a leaf shape in yellow overlaying this leaf that's otherwise red. So that is part of their evidence to show that these plants are producing the red directly in response to getting sun exposure. So that leaf, that yellow leaf silhouette there is a part of the leaf that was shaded and didn't need the red sun protection. These other parts put in the red protection, so they get kind of a mottled look of wherever the sun was intense, they put in more red. Areas with less sun exposure stayed yellow. And it's not as clear cut as you would think. There are a lot of people still investigating this. Different colors that different plants make. And one of the hypotheses or places to investigate is this difference between North America, Eastern Asia, and Europe. So Europe has a lot of researchers, and they say, all right, well, why do we have so many more yellow-leaved plants? So proportionally, European plants are 80% plants that are producing yellow leaves versus North America closer to 50% yellow, 50% red. And one of their pieces of evidence is that most of Europe, we exclude Spain and southern Italy, most of Europe is falling more in this yellow zone of solar radiation. I don't know why that's not just a straight line, but I'll take their word for it. So Europe gets a little bit less intense sun exposure in September than North America. That was part of their hypothesis. So basically, plants can be choosy, and the plants in North America need to put in more reds. It's not black and white, it's about twice as many species with these red leaves. Other possible functions. Here's a couple on this slide, two headlines left and right. Anthocyanins putting color into leaves to protect from herbivory. So over here they've got leaves that are attacked by insects, leaves that are colored green. So these are young leaves of an oak plant. The green young leaves experienced about 60% of their leaves being attacked. Young leaves that were red were attacked at about 20%. And this, I guess I was looking into this more because it hadn't really made sense to me before. I couldn't get it to make as much sense because there are like herbaceous plants that are darkly colored in the spring. So what gives? I don't think they demonstrated it in this study, but their hypothesis was that insects are more visible on a red leaf. So that the animals that are eating insects would be able to see them and pick them off of the red leaves better than they could pick them off of the green leaves. Over on the right side, in correlation where the antioxidants were protecting another molecule from being broken down by light. So this molecule called thiorubrine A, the top right graph there says time in minutes. This is time in the sun. Light exposure shows that this molecule breaks down if it's in the sun. So this is a defense molecule. But it doesn't last if it's baked by the sun too much. So they have their hypothesis here that the plant has put in this anthocyanin, a pigment in the leaves, to protect the defense compound from being degraded by the light. See, there's a lot going on. This is one of these questions that really started because a student asked me, he said, why are there so many black seeds out there? It does seem like the seed part of the life cycle is often black. Of the seeds we collected, there was black medic way back at the beginning of the semester. There was field knotweed, had very black seeds. So if you imagine being a seed, seeds have cells on the inside and they are dormant, but they're still potentially exposed to the sun. Having those colored black, if you have seeds and they fall on the ground and they get baked by the sun for a summer, having them colored black is a nice way to protect them from sun damage. This is a molecule called phytomelanin. So phyto for plants and melanin, just like what we have in our cells when you get a tan, or people who are naturally darkly colored skin have more melanin in their skin. That protects humans against it. All right, any questions so far? Take a little breather. Uh-huh. Right. Um, good question. Yeah, right. So Linda's question, why not, I guess maybe as a contrast, why not a white seed? Bright white seed, if you live in a desert, wearing white is a good way to get the light to bounce off of you. Great question. I guess I'll have to keep digging on that. I guess I would suspect that the absorption happens away from in molecules that are not going to affect the living cells as much. So these sections here, this dark zone here, this is I think it's like fruit wall there, maybe seed coat, and this black pigment, if it's produced like as part of a seed, if that's away from the living cells, I think I would expect maybe that it would just, you know, it might, if something was alive there, it might cause it some biological damage, but it's not a living layer. So instead, it just, I guess, locks up the solar energy. Yeah, I think so. That's my right. Yeah. So the living important part of the seed, the embryo, seeds easier to spot if they were white. I don't. Good question. I don't know how well plants can make white. Kind of the fallback color for seeds is usually a brown, I think. Plant color. I don't know if they have the ability to be white. I'm trying to think if I know of any white seeds. Flower petals can be white because they've got thin layers of cells, and there may be more juicy cells in a petal. Short-lived cells. I don't know that white petals really are. They don't make a white pigment so much as they just are. Their cells are built to reflect a lot of light. Tomato seeds are pretty white. All right. Agreed. I don't know. White poppy seeds. Uh-huh. Yeah. It's white pepper, right? Right. So seeds of pepper, and then also the other plant we call pepper, like I don't know. Great questions, everybody. You buy like black pepper and white pepper. Uh, is it? No. I've seen red peppers. All right. I'll have to look into that. Yeah, you did your research? Okay. I'm still curious. So Linda says these are the white parts is the inside of the fruit. So peppercorns are actually like a shriveled up fruit of the plant. All right. Well, we'll use that example for now. The uh-huh. Green ones. Yeah, I've seen red ones that must be red peppercorns are a whole different thing. Oh, okay. I have a lot to learn about peppercorns, I guess. Okay. So that was a lot about pigments. If we're talking about attracting animals, another way to attract animals is through scent. This is a rather specific interaction. So if you imagine the things that smell good to you, right? You can smell your way to a meal, to a bonfire. You can tell a fruit from a steak. So these animals that are visiting plants with scents, they can follow a specific scent combination, the kind of combination of scent and color provides a good signal to animals to tell them which plants are good to go to. Scents are better at transmitting over long distances. So I mentioned before the hawk moth, an animal that can fly for kilometers every night. Might not be able to see that far, but scents can travel very far depending on what kind they are. There's a researcher called Rob Ragusa. He's made a career out of studying the floral scent chemistry of plants. And it's really neat. One of those that I don't think people thought to do it or were able to do it quite as well in the past. He hooks up a vacuum system, puts a flower into a sealed container, and then draws a vacuum of the air that's surrounding that flower. And then has a matrix that kind of binds up the scent chemicals that come out of there. So you can enrich to study what kind of scent molecules are produced. And then you can break them down in the laboratory. And it's pretty complex. So this is the scent of a tobacco flower, all kinds of different molecules. And the differences among species can give each species really a unique arrangement of molecules that produce its scent. So this is from the same study that I just showed you the image from. If we start with the combination of these important scent chemicals, these arrows lead into directions where the scent or the attraction of that flower could be different. So different in intensity, same molecules, but in different amounts. Mostly the same molecules, but with a different one added, or the same scent associated with a different appearance. So a different color, different size of flower. So it's a pretty complex environment trying to appeal to the right pollinator. Maybe scents that are already familiar from other flowers. Maybe it's important to distinguish yourself from other flowers. So plants can do this with a variety of different chemicals, and they have control over which chemicals they're making. All right, wouldn't be worth talking about secondary compounds if we didn't talk about plants defending themselves. So here we've got a plant with some glandular hairs. So these are hairs that produce compounds inside of them. They're kind of juicy, and those compounds can be for attraction, can be toxic. So plants in general aren't all that tasty. So when people go out in the field and they say, "Can I eat it?" Right? Can I eat this plant? The answer is usually no. So there's a limited number of plants that you could just go out into nature and find a plant that's not going to taste bad or do you some harm. It tastes bad, right? So we eat things that are reasonably palatable, things that won't make us sick over time. So that's really like the default, is for plants to be defensive. Some of the things we eat are the younger leaves of plants. So there's a variety of plants around here that you could eat in their young leaf state that you wouldn't want to eat later on. So as time gets on, they get tougher. They can invest more in fibers or lignin, things like that are difficult to chew, unpleasant to chew. But on top of that, this is a nice study that shows the accumulation of a couple of these toxic molecules over the lifetime of this plant. So depending on how old the plant is, plants up to couple months old, not so many compounds, and then the concentration of those compounds goes way up after that point. Let's see, maybe before I spoil this for you on the next slide, why should that be? Why would they produce these compounds for defense only after being alive for a couple of months? When the flowers are present? All right, so maybe there's a more delicate life stage coming up. Certainly losing a flower stalk would be problematic. Any other thoughts? Oh, chat window says preparation for reproduction. All right, that seems to be a popular idea. Here's another one. So if you think about a plant that has grown from a seed, being able to defend yourself requires having the resources to do that. So even if you're making something, one of these molecules that I describe as relatively cheap, even if you use one of those, seedling doesn't start with a lot of those even cheap resources. It's got to do some photosynthesis. And it's kind of a relative investment thing. So you could produce one leaf, hold on to that leaf with some chemicals that defend it, but that might be at the cost of producing more leaves. It's kind of this early stage, seedling stage, low investment in defense or alternatively tolerance. So maybe being able to grow back after something has been chewed off or something like that. So there's kind of this low period when it's more in the plant's interest to get bigger. I was going to use a reference to something from my childhood, but I don't think anybody get it. You remember those drink milk commercials? There's a kid, it was all about, drink milk as a kid. And there's this like spindly little kid, and he says, "But I'm drinking milk, and one day I'm going to be strong." And they cut to different actors as the kid grew up, and then it was like a big teenage kid with big muscles, implying that the milk did all the work. That child invested in getting bigger, and therefore was able to defend itself. Go watch them; they're great. All right, so then at some point, resources are more abundant, plants can defend themselves. And we have run out of time, so maybe I'll pick up on this next time. There's a little bit more about defense. But we're out of time today. Next time I see you, we will be all in our WebEx rooms, and I'll be in front of a camera. So, looking forward to that. If you have a camera and you want to share your lovely visage with us on Tuesday, that would be great. Class on Tuesday, and then a Thanksgiving holiday. Any questions from today? Time to look into some white seeds. Yep. Yes. Yeah, so what I see here, I see like a brown at the bottom, black. I don't know how perfectly sterile these are, but there are certainly lab plants that people grow under practically sterile conditions or fully sterile conditions. I've never been very successful at that myself. So it might come down to the specific plants, or a lot of times you can add chemicals that might help you with, the plant needs a certain signal from its environment. But plant cells and they have everything they need, and nothing is attacking them, then they should be able to be alive. So like in the, if you take something that a animal or a fungal partnership usually brings extra nutrients or specific chemicals to that, you can add those in the lab and substitute in for that. So theoretically, you should be able to chemically produce the best environment that plant could ever have. If you take whatever it needs from fungus or bacteria and you just supply that to the plant. Now this plant tissue culture doesn't work for everything and can be notoriously challenging. So like orchids, people like to grow. There's a lot of money if you could successfully take a piece of an orchid and grow it into, or even just a seed. Sometimes people can't get their orchid seeds to grow. They're missing something biological that hasn't been figured out. That's a case where, yeah, I think there's a plant that just won't take to the artificial conditions as they are provided right now. But theoretically, if you knew that they had a specific fungal species and you could identify the chemicals that that fungus was giving to the orchid, and you could just add them instead, you could get there yourself. Because as it comes down to the finest detail, like there's just a plant cell, and that plant cell needs to be in the environment that makes it happy. And as long as you can do that, I think it's going to thrive. There definitely are species that people have ended up using in the lab that are easier to work with than others.